Tánaiste, I think before the last general election you made a very significant commitment in relation to people with disabilities and people with special needs, and particularly young children. And I want to raise today with you what I believe is the unacceptable situation facing children in particular and provision of special needs supports in our schools. Now, the deadline for applications for SNAs is tomorrow, September the 20th. It was October the 5th last year. So by definition, you're putting far more pressure on schools, parents and children. We have 71,000 children starting school this September, 10,000 more than last year. And clearly the shortening of the deadline is a backdoor way of implementing unacceptable cuts. And what I am witnessing and people are witnessing really is a constant limiting of support, restrictions of support. And I want to raise with you this morning a case which illustrates this very seriously. I don't like normally raising individual cases, but I have the permission of the parents to do so, and it's the case of young Kate Crowley in Cork, 5 years of age, a child with an extraordinary set of challenges presented to her at birth, with 5 surgeries since birth, multiple issues in terms of special needs, wheelchair-bound, spinal rods, severe respiratory conditions, hearing problems, to mention but a few. And she's come through life with a remarkable fighting spirit, intellectually very bright, and tremendous support from her parents. Now, Tánaiste, she was refused a special needs assistant. And she was ultimately told that she could have access with 5 other children to a special needs assistant.
Thank you.
Now, in my experience in education I had down through the years, when I saw this case, it was an obvious case to me. And I raise it because it illustrates that there is something fundamentally wrong with the system when a girl like Kate Crowley is refused a special needs assistance. In my humble opinion, it's very obvious that she should have one. She has not yet started school this September, despite the multiplicity of conditions that she has. And why is it that the system now seems to be about restricting access to education, making parents fight the struggle all along the way? And these parents have been through the mill. They're happy to be working with their child and supporting their child, but they should not have been put through this struggle, and they should not be put through this particular struggle. There's a need for advocacy to be at the centre of the system, and it's missing.
Thank you, David.
And this case illustrates it more than anything I've come across in recent years.
Thank you. Tánaiste.
Well, first of all, I've heard what Deputy Martin has said about Kate Crowley. I don't know about this case. I've asked the Minister for Education while you were raising it if he's aware of it. He's not aware of it. He's not aware of it. But I want to tell you now that the Minister for Education will examine the case that you have just raised. We'll see what has happened there and will respond to it. And he will do that very quickly indeed, because I think it is fair to say that, where somebody has a need, that need should be addressed. On the general issue of special needs provision in our schools, despite the very challenging financial circumstances that the country has faced, this government has protected the budget for special education. It's 1.3 billion euros. And government policy has focused on ensuring that all children have access to an education that's appropriate to their needs, and preferably in mainstream schools. A child-centred approach to education of all children with special educational needs is promoted to ensure a continuum of their special needs provision. We have protected the number of resource teachers and special needs assistants in school. Currently, they stand, in the case of special needs assistants, there are 10,575 special needs assistants in the system, and there are 5,265 resource teachers. In addition, the National Council for Special Education has announced the opening of 118 new special classes this month, which will cater for up to 700 pupils at both primary and post-primary level. 242 special classes have already been created during the lifetime of this government, a 50% increase in the availability of special classes since 2011. There are now over 700 classes, such classes with 5,000 pupils accessing them. Over 1,100 teachers are also being provided for in special schools, providing teaching to pupils with various disabilities at a much reduced pupil-teacher ratios. For example, the autism PTR is 6:1 and the moderate general learning disability PTR is 8:1. So, in overall terms, 15% of the total education budget is spent on special education. I think that is as it should be, because we all recognise that the special education needs of children who need it do need to be met and should be met.
Thank you. I'm surprised that,
that
the Minister for Education is not aware of the case, because I did write to you, Minister, in relation to this particular case some weeks back. So you might check that, and I think others wrote to you as well. So the situation is very well known in the department and would be very well known in the Special Education Review Council, because rather than go public on this initially, I wrote about it. I just couldn't believe it, to be frank, that despite all the official rhetoric, and that's the problem here, Tánaiste, and I heard what you said, but it's when you talk to parents and you talk to teachers and you talk to school principals, they just tell you a different story. Like, I was in Cork the other night, and a young special needs teacher, a resource teacher, 9:15 at night, called me into her kitchen to tell me the work she was doing and how down she now was in spirit because of what was happening in her particular school in terms of the cuts to resource teaching that she has experienced in the last year or so.
Question, please.
The message we're getting on the ground from parents, teachers and children is very different to what we're being told officially and to what people are hearing.
Thank you.
And there's a problem here, Tánaiste. And the case of Kate Crowley illustrates it more than anything else, that the system lacks at its core advocacy for the child. It should be about facilitation of the child's right to a constitutional right to an education. That should be the driving spirit behind how people operate within the system.
Thank you.
Whereas what we're now getting is shortening of deadlines. Will you, for example, agree to extend the deadline? Sheila Noonan of the INTO has said that it's going to have a major impact. Will you exceed the resource teacher cap, for example? He's brought forward a 500, but will you exceed the cap on resource teachers if new needs emerge in the autumn? That's the big problem with the deadline. Needs can emerge, particularly with new children starting, as we know, through diagnosis, through monitoring by teachers in the school. Will that be exceeded if necessary?
Well, I think we're dealing with two things here. I mean, first of all, as I have said, the government has protected the provision for special needs education, and I've outlined to you the detail of that and the additional special classes and the measures that have been taken to protect special needs assistants and resource teachers. Now, with that being the case, the question does arise, and you have rightly raised it, as to why is it then that you will find an individual case or a particular problem in an individual school where you have a child who clearly needs special needs provision, and why isn't that being addressed? Now, the Minister for Education is doing a number of things to, if you like, square those two. The first is that he has appointed Mr. Eamon Stack to do an assessment of the allocation model as to why, for example, the protection of resources does not appear in some cases to be translated on the ground. I understand that he will have an interim report from Mr. Stack at the beginning of October. You have raised the issue about, if you like, the earlier application, the requirement for an earlier application to be made for special needs and for resource teachers and so on. And that is precisely to enable the individual cases, if you like, the difference between the general allocation which has been protected and what is happening in the ground in individual schools, for that to, if you like, the time to be shortened so that it can be addressed quickly and so that the resources can be deployed to where they're actually needed. Yeah.